On a quiet November afternoon in 2016, a young mother disappeared while jogging through the winding trails of Northern California. Her name was Sherri Papini, a woman described as beautiful, bubbly, and devoted to her family. For 22 harrowing days, her husband and children lived in anguish, the nation glued to their screens as headlines screamed, "California's Supermom abducted." And then, just as mysteriously as she vanished, Sherri returned, bruised, emaciated, and shackled, claiming she had endured the unimaginable. Hit the subscribe button, like this video. It will help us bring you more chilling true crime stories that will keep you in shock. Now let's dive into it. It was a story almost too horrifying to believe. But as investigators peeled back the layers, what emerged was something far darker, far stranger, and far more twisted than anyone could have imagined. This is the true crime story of Sherri Papini, a tale of deception. By all appearances, Sherri Papini had it all. Living in the small, tight-knit community of Redding, California, she seemed like the perfect suburban mother. Friends and neighbors often saw her jogging along forested paths, pushing strollers at the park, and posting cheerful snapshots of family life online. Her husband, Keith Papini, was her high school sweetheart, devoted, soft-spoken, and hardworking. Together, they were raising two young children in a cozy home that seemed to radiate love. But behind the picture-perfect exterior, cracks were beginning to show. Those who knew Sherri well sometimes described her as intense, even obsessive. She demanded attention, thrived on drama, and often bent the truth to suit her needs. Old acquaintances recalled her wild teenage years filled with fights, lies, and sudden disappearances. Still, no one could have predicted what would happen on November 2nd, 2016. That morning started like any other. Keith left for work, the children went off to daycare, and Sherri went for her routine jog near the old Oregon Trail, a rugged stretch surrounded by towering pines. But when Keith came home later that afternoon, something was wrong. His wife wasn't there. The kids hadn't been picked up. Sherri's phone was found abandoned near the jogging path, her white earbuds tangled in strands of her hair. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Panic surged through the Papini household. Keith called police, his voice breaking with desperation as he begged for help. "I can't find my wife. I came home from work, and she's gone." The search was immediate and massive. Helicopters scoured the woods. Volunteers canvassed neighborhoods. Flyers with Sherri's smiling face were taped to every gas station, every stop sign, every church bulletin board. The nation soon knew her name. The case had all the elements of a nightmare and a media sensation. A young, attractive mother of two kidnapped in broad daylight while jogging. Her handsome, grieving husband making emotional pleas on television. The family torn apart. News outlets dubbed her the Supermom. Talk shows dissected theories. Internet sleuths speculated wildly: human trafficking, cartel abduction, even a stalker lurking in the shadows. The pressure on law enforcement was suffocating. Everyone wanted answers. And then 3 weeks later, the impossible happened. It was Thanksgiving morning, November 24th, 2016, when Sherri reappeared. Found by a passing motorist on a lonely stretch of highway, she was a ghostly shadow of the woman who had disappeared. Her once blonde hair was crudely chopped off. Her thin frame was covered in bruises. Shackles had rubbed her wrists raw. She bore a brand, an actual burn scar seared into her shoulder. She sobbed uncontrollably as she told officers she had been kidnapped by two Hispanic women armed with guns. For 22 days, she claimed, they had kept her chained in a dark room, starved her, and beaten her whenever she tried to resist. Her husband, Keith, was overcome with relief. In a now famous interview, he wept openly, describing their reunion. "I hugged her. I just held her. I thought I was dreaming." America, too, exhaled. Against all odds, the Supermom was back. But something about her story didn't quite add up. At first, investigators tread lightly. Sherri was fragile, traumatized, and recovering. Yet as they pressed her for details, cracks began to appear in her tale. She couldn't describe where she had been held. She gave conflicting accounts of her captors. Despite claiming she'd been chained, her wrists showed no lasting damage. Despite saying she had been starved, medical records suggested her weight loss wasn't as drastic as expected. And then there was the branding, a bizarre, almost theatrical flourish. Still, sympathy shielded her. Who would doubt a mother who had clearly suffered? Who would question the tears of her devoted husband? But the FBI wasn't done digging. In 2017, investigators tested evidence recovered from Sherri's clothing. To their surprise, they found male DNA that did not belong to Keith. Even more startling, the DNA matched someone in the national database. It belonged to a man Sherri had once dated. His name? James Reyes. When questioned, Reyes dropped a bombshell. Sherri had not been kidnapped at all. She had been staying with him, willingly, in his apartment hundreds of miles away. She asked him to help her run away from her life. She even intentionally injured herself to make her story convincing. The shocking revelation left investigators reeling. Could it be true? Had Sherri staged her own disappearance? By 2019, law enforcement had serious doubts about Sherri's story. Yet the public still believed her, and her husband defended her fiercely. She attended therapy, spoke of nightmares, and clung to her tale of abduction. But behind the scenes, the FBI built its case. They collected texts between Sherri and Reyes, confirming she had orchestrated her kidnapping. They interviewed friends who described her as manipulative and dishonest. They even tracked her movements during the days she claimed to be chained in a basement. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to look less like a tragedy and more like a lie. But why would she do it? What could possibly drive a mother of two to fake her own abduction? By March 2022, nearly 6 years after her supposed kidnapping, the truth finally exploded into public view. Federal prosecutors charged Sherri Papini with making false statements and committing mail fraud after she continued collecting money meant for victims. The once beloved Supermom now stood exposed as a liar. Court documents revealed a chilling portrait. Sherri staged her own kidnapping for attention, sympathy, and financial gain. She inflicted wounds on herself. She lied to her husband. She manipulated the nation. Her husband, Keith, filed for divorce the very day she admitted her guilt. And the world was left reeling. How could a mother do this to her children? How could a wife betray her husband so cruelly? And most haunting of all, what darkness inside Sherri Papini drove her to commit such a twisted act? But even as the truth surfaced, deeper questions remained. Sherri Papini wasn't just a liar. She was a woman with a history of disturbing behavior, one that friends, family, and even ex-boyfriends had witnessed long before her staged abduction. Her deception didn't begin in 2016. It began much earlier, because the tale of Sherri Papini is not just a story of a staged kidnapping. When the truth about Sherri Papini's staged abduction finally came crashing down, the world recoiled in shock. But those who knew her best weren't surprised, because this wasn't the first time Sherri had spun a story that blurred the line between reality and fabrication. It wasn't the first time she had sought attention through manipulation, and it certainly wasn't the first time she had hurt those closest to her. To understand how a mother of two could fake her own kidnapping, one has to travel back into Sherri's past, where her patterns of deception were already firmly in place. This is the part of the story most never heard. Sherri was born in 1982 in Shasta County, California, a picturesque but isolated region known for its forests, mountains, and quiet rural communities. From the outside, her upbringing seemed ordinary, but those who grew up around her painted a different picture. Old friends described Sherri as a girl who craved attention, someone who could switch from sweet to manipulative in the blink of an eye. One childhood friend recalled, "She always wanted to be the center of everything. If she wasn't, she'd find a way to make herself the victim." Her high school years reinforced this pattern. Teachers remembered her as bright, but often dramatic. Classmates described her as toxic, manipulative, and prone to lying. After graduation, Sherri's relationships with men followed the same script: intense, chaotic, and often destructive. Court documents later revealed disturbing allegations from Sherri's ex-boyfriends, One former partner claimed that whenever they argued, Sherri would threaten to harm herself and then blame him. On more than one occasion, she allegedly bruised herself and accused him of abuse, forcing him to defend himself against claims that weren't true. Another ex said Sherri would run away for days, leaving frantic notes, only to return with dramatic stories of being victimized. And then there was the incident with her own family. In sworn affidavits, Sherri's mother once called police after her daughter claimed she was hurting herself and blaming others. Her father described her as attention-seeking and dishonest. These weren't just one-off behaviors. They were a pattern, a blueprint. And in 2016, when the world believed Sherri had been kidnapped, it was that same blueprint she followed. To understand the level of deception, investigators dug into Sherri's communications leading up to her disappearance. What they found was shocking. Sherri had reconnected with James Reyes, an old boyfriend living in Costa Mesa, California. She confided in him, telling him her marriage was abusive, that she was unsafe, that she needed to escape. It wasn't true. Keith Papini had never harmed her. But James believed her. When Sherri begged him to help her disappear, James drove hundreds of miles to pick her up. For weeks, she stayed at his apartment. He later told investigators she never seemed afraid, never acted like a captive. She spent her time watching TV, eating, and occasionally harming herself to make her story more believable. The bruises? Self-inflicted. The branding on her shoulder? Sherri asked James to do it. The cut hair? She chopped it herself. And when it was all over, when she was ready to return, she staged her escape and reappeared on the side of a highway, ready to sell her lie to the world. In the weeks following her return, donations poured in. A GoFundMe page for the Papini family raised over $49,000. The California Victim Compensation Board paid her tens of thousands of dollars for therapy, relocation, and other expenses. Meanwhile, Keith was living in a nightmare of his own. He stood by his wife, believed her story, and defended her against skeptics. He spoke tearfully on national television, describing her injuries, her trauma, and her strength. All the while, Sherri was lying to him, to her children, and to the entire nation. For years, the truth remained hidden. But by 2020, investigators had assembled enough evidence to confront her. When FBI agents presented Sherri with DNA evidence linking her to James Reyes, she doubled down on her lies. She claimed she didn't know how his DNA got on her clothing. She insisted she had never been with him. It was a desperate act, but one that only deepened her deception. The hammer finally came down in March 2022. Sherri Papini was arrested and charged with mail fraud and making false statements to federal agents. The nation once again gasped. But this time, it wasn't sympathy they felt. It was outrage. Sherri, once the supermom who had survived a nightmare, was now branded as a fraud, a liar, and a criminal. In a stunning court appearance, she admitted everything. She confessed she had never been kidnapped. She confessed she had stayed willingly with James Reyes. And she confessed she had taken money she knew she didn't deserve. The image of the fragile, broken mother was shattered. In its place stood a woman who had manipulated her husband, her children, her community, and an entire country. Her sentencing was swift. 18 months in federal prison and an order to repay over $300,000 in restitution. But by then, the damage was already done. Perhaps the greatest casualty of Sherri's deception was her family. Keith Papini, the man who had defended her so passionately, filed for divorce the very day she confessed. In his filings, he wrote, "I wish to make it clear that my goal is to protect my children from the trauma caused by their mother." He gained full custody of their 2 children, who had grown up believing their mother had been kidnapped by masked women. Now they were forced to confront the devastating truth. Their mother had lied about everything. The emotional toll was staggering. The children needed therapy. Keith had to rebuild a life shattered by betrayal. And Sherri? She went to prison. Not just for her crimes, but for the destruction she left in her wake. Even now, one haunting question lingers. Why did she do it? Some psychologists believe Sherri suffered from narcissistic personality disorder, an insatiable need for attention, control, and sympathy. Others suggest she was addicted to the thrill of deception, the high of playing the victim. Still others argue it was about money. By staging her kidnapping, she not only secured sympathy but financial benefits. But perhaps the most chilling explanation is the simplest. She wanted to be the center of attention no matter the cost. And in the process, she destroyed everything she claimed to love. Even after her release from prison, Sherri Papini remains one of the most infamous cases of deception in recent memory. Her story is taught in criminal psychology classes. Her name has become shorthand for manipulation on a grand scale. But for those who lived through it, her children, her ex-husband, her community, the scars run much deeper. They weren't just deceived. They were betrayed. And the betrayal came not from a stranger lurking in the shadows, but from the person they trusted most. But is this truly where the story ends? Because in the aftermath of her release, new questions began to surface. Some investigators wonder if Sherri's deception went even further than what the courts uncovered. Were there other lies she told that never came to light? Other manipulations buried in her past? And could she, even now, be planning her next move? The world may think it knows the whole story of Sherri Papini. Tell me what you think in the comments section below, and make sure to hit the subscribe button to help us bring you more true crime chilling story.